start, everyone. So hello to everyone, and welcome to the second in our series of HE Innovate webinars. And the title for this webinar is Transformational Learning and the Future of Entrepreneurial Higher Education Institutions. And we're delighted to have you all here, and people are still arriving as I'm speaking. So my name is Rebecca Allinson, and I work for Technopolis as part of the HE Innovate team. And with Julia Jaworka, I'll be your moderator for this session. Now, before introducing today's webinar, I have a few housekeeping issues to cover. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you may also notice that we're using the meeting function of Zoom rather than the webinar function. And this is to give you the opportunity later on to engage with other participants in small working groups. Therefore, what we've done is we've muted everybody for the plenary sessions just to keep the background noise to a minimum. Even though we've muted you, we really welcome your questions and comments. And there is a comment section that some of you will see on the right of your screen. So please feel free to add comments and questions at any time during the webinar. And if you have a particular speaker in mind, you can add their name as well. We will summarize some of the chat comments, and our speakers will look at the questions at the end of the session. And you can also raise questions and discuss those with your breakout rooms. As you know, sometimes things go wrong, so please bear with us, and we'll try to make sure everything is as smooth as possible. We have a team on hand who will hopefully ensure that everything runs really smoothly. So just moving on now to the webinar. So today we have an inspirational lineup and a format for you, and we'd like to welcome our guests. So first, I would like to introduce Otto Scharmer. Otto is a senior lecturer of the MIT Management Sloan School, inventor of Theory U, and co-founder of the Presencing Institute. Otto will be in conversation with our other guests, Wolfgang Stark and Klaus Seiler. Wolfgang is the director of the Steinbeis Center for Innovation and Sustainable Leadership, and Klaus Seiler is a professor for entrepreneurship at the Munich University of Applied Sciences and CEO of the Strascheg Center for Entrepreneurship. As well as the dialogue between our distinguished guests, we also have some music for you from Michael Spencer, and we will introduce Michael and tell you more about that later on in the webinar. So let me hand over to Otto, Wolfgang, and Klaus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Dear Otto, we are really delighted to have you here and to talk together with Klaus to have a dialogue about your work, but also about maybe the future role of entrepreneurial universities, or maybe also the future role of universities in our society itself. And now as we all know, we have a very special situation right now, a historic situation, talking about the pandemic we are experiencing, which is not only coming like a shock to our society, but also the coronavirus has opened up a lot of rooms for opportunities and fast, rapid developments. Before we start, we go for the current situation. I'd like to go back 20 years ago. You will remember, or hopefully will remember, you were writing a paper together with Katrin Käufer about universities as a place for the entrepreneurial person or entrepreneurial personality. And in our groups and discussions in Germany and in the ULab, this is a very important and still very important and basic paper, because already then you kind of laid down the basics of what you now call a Theory U, and you're well known for this Theory U as a concept which is asking for different kinds of knowledge. So, and in your paper, you're asking about the the transcending from explicit knowledge, which is integral part of our universities, to experiential knowledge, tacit knowledge, and what you call self-transcending knowledge. And if you go back 20 years ago and compare it to the time right now, what do you think? What has changed in the meantime? Is it what do you realize? What did you experience in changing in terms of universities?
Yes. So thank you, Wolfgang, and thanks to all three of you to inviting me to this conversation here, which is very close to my heart, actually, because the way kind of I always saw, even though I rarely say that, my own role or my own aspiration really to help to reinvent the 21st century university one way or another. And yet, so that's not really, that hasn't been the primary focus, but that was always kind of the deeper intention I'm holding. So being re-invited back into this conversation, makes me really happy, and I'm grateful for that. And look forward to, also to the breakout groups and to learn what's actually happening and what is happening in the current moment. How can we maybe move the dial a little bit? Now, what has happened, and I'm also genuinely shocked that anyone read that paper, right? So it's so that's a very nice surprise. Thank you for that. And so what has happened since? I think like maybe two or three things. I mean, the first two are really obvious. I mean, so back then we said, well, we need to, the university as a place where kind of the entrepreneurial human being, where we can access and learn kind of how to activate our deeper co-creative capacities and put that into the service of others, right? As an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, and so forth. I think that was like a good idea back then, resonated with a number of people, but now it's so obvious, right? And so I think so the first thing that has changed is the need for that kind of institution has going up dramatically, right? Because now where we deal with disruption on a massive scale, of course, how do you deal with, so how can you respond? What is disruption? Disruption essentially means the future is going to be different from the past. That means as a learner, you better have a method that allows you to connect to emerging future possibilities and then making them happen together, bring them into reality. And so that was like a good idea or an interesting idea back then. And now it's almost like a necessity. And everyone says, of course, yeah, but how do you do that, right? So that's the first thing, that the need has been going up. The second thing is, of course, digitization, right? So we live in a different environment where we see that disruption, one wave, the current disruption in the space of education, of course, is driven by digitization. That's number two. And I would say number three is that I would say the case. So back then I talked about that with the distinction you just made reference to: explicit knowledge, tacit knowledge, and then self-transcending knowledge, a knowledge that connects with the deeper sources of who we are and the kind of future we want to bring into reality. I would say that what we see today is more evidence that there is a bigger shift of learning happening, at least in the need area. I would say around two things. One is linking, not only shifting the outer place of learning from the classroom to the streets, right? AKA action learning. Right. So that may not be massive, but for example, when I look at Sloan here at MIT, there is I go across schools, I go across departments, it happens all over the place. it's kind of what people call their defining MIT experience, right? Kind of being engaged in these real startups and these real ventures. So it's not that everything is on the streets, but that has become a key ingredient of kind of their educational experience here. And I think we are not an exception there. So that happens in many places. So there's the shift of the outer place of learning, right? That's happening more than it used to be, like 20 years ago. But the other thing is something more subtle, which is a shift of the inner place of learning, from the head to the heart, and from the heart to the hand. So this whole person, whole systems learning as something that really is a need now, not only in terms of, yes, the big SDGs, how are we going to respond to them? Well, we need kind of ecosystem learning, basically, right? So there's like an outer piece to that. But what I think is interesting, and that's different now, because now we can also say it's complemented by an inner piece, because the next generation of students, kind of the next generation of change makers in this century, which is our current students, they come with a predisposition that now maybe has changed. It's different now than it was 20 years ago. And well, that's just a proposition. Many of you in this loop, you have a lot more experience. I mean, I just have this small little window into reality. But that's from my little window what I would say. I would be really interested in what you guys are seeing there. But I would say there is a shift towards a need, a felt need for a deeper type of learning that is clearly going beyond this, that is not only about practical tools, but that also has to do with, the heart, kind of with, activating another source of social and co-creative intelligence that maybe when disruption happens, right, and all the other navigation instruments are no longer working, maybe then that's what's really counts, right? Because, when you really face a moment of disruption, that was basically the, not that he's a great example, but, the Steve Jobs teaching, right? The only thing you can do is to follow your heart, right? Kind of that's because that's the pathway you need to follow. And that's what many entrepreneurs are doing. It's at the heart of all great entrepreneurship anyhow, but we haven't really paid attention to that consciously. So I would say it's probably not a felt need for everyone. I mean, there's like really two groups of students today, I would say, at our schools, probably in universities. But this other group that feels that as a real need is so much bigger now than it used to be 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's. I think that's a very important point to look at, especially in our situation right now. We're having the big disruption right now. We're seeing it. We are experiencing it, and we don't know yet how to react to that. Coming to this current situation, I think what we see on the one hand, like you mentioned before already, is there's a growing group of people who really want to change something, who really are kind of part of the transformation, or want to be part of a transformational change right now. But looking at the global crisis right now, how could you explain a little bit more what do you think about this inner learning or deep learning you're mentioning, and what is the role of this individual change and individual learning right now, and link it with what we usually are used to as kind of the fast response to the COVID crisis or the Corona crisis. So that's kind of still, in my opinion, it's still a big gap between the two things. But maybe it's closing now.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's. I would say the current crisis, the pandemic, the Corona situation has amplified all these things that I just mentioned, right? So, so, I mean, and it goes in both directions, right? So, but just to give a concrete example, also, I think because Wolfgang, I saw you there in some of these sessions. So, I mean, a concrete example is for kind of, and that's basically, so when you ask me, okay, there's like maybe some of the ideas that we talk about here, these, so the how to activate these deeper human and social capacities for entrepreneurship and co-creative systems change. Maybe kind of some of these ideas were articulated 20 years ago, but now is where you really see it happening. I mean, it is really different. And for me, if I trace that back, I have like two specific moments where I would say, well, I saw something shifting. And the first one, really for the first, I mean, I came here 25 years ago to MIT, back then the MIT Learning Center, and I've been forever participating in action research and action learning projects in a variety of places. You know, all small projects here and there, and then all the talk about systems change, and sometimes you wonder, is that really true, right? So how does that ever add up to the level of scale that's necessary today? And so that was the first phase, right? Which is most of the time, really. And then 5 years ago, we put ULab, which is the class I'm teaching here at Sloan, online, and called it, you know, on the edX platform, basically. And we complemented, because edX, of course, right, traditional one-to-many structure. So we complemented that ULab, you know, we basically MOOC with a platform that helped people to self-organize in groups. And what resulted from that is basically a global ecosystem. So we had like thousands of hubs of groups that locally self-organized and went through that, you know, in an orchestrated way. They went through this kind of deep learning cycle themselves. And a third of them who took the exit survey, they said that was transformational to them. And that was a real eye-opener to me, because when you, as an educator, you have a very different role when you move into that, because you basically have to hand over all your tools and hope that the people in their own context use them in the right way. And then you're coaching them how to do it. And so it's very different to what you would do in a single classroom. And what my big learning there is that the readiness and the willingness of people to engage in radically different modes of learning is so much bigger than we expect. Then, all the golden rules, how you do a MOOC and everything, kind of what people told us, it's actually not true. I mean, it's when you move into that space, when you activate with that deeper felt sense and need that many people feel, kind of to engage in a deep learning cycle, you can tap into a whole other level of learning. So that was the first thing that we learned. And now, so that was 5 years ago. And it taught me that there is a lot more going on that we as educators could tap into and partner with. Because, it's really the partner with, which is the right kind of relationship mode there. Uh-huh. So then to the current moment, so that's, in the current moment, I put out a blog mid-March, that's just a few weeks ago, on the current learnings from Corona towards climate action. And at the end of that blog, I said, well, we really needed to create so we should have like an impromptu learning infrastructure that would allow us to really lean deeper into the current moment, sense into what's really, because whenever disruption happens, we know for a brief glimpse, we can connect with what's truly essential, right? And all the other stuff that is not essential. So if we create a deep sense-making and deep listening infrastructure for that, where we could help each other to do that, while being in self-isolation and quarantine, wouldn't that be helpful? And couldn't we also use that to reimagine our economies, our democracies, our societies, our civilization going forward, in a way that we all know we have to, right? Kind of where the transformation that needs to happen in this decade is really kind of beginning to be embodied now. Mm-hmm. And within days, 10,000 people said, yeah, count me in, right? 14 weeks, yes, count me in. And so we have a team of over 100, now it's 150 volunteers around 7 language tracks, it's basically not so we intentionally said, it's not a course, it's not a program. We are not dragging you through, this and that. It's like a journey. And the journey means you follow your energy, but we create a holding space for you. And it's really interesting what happens there. And what we see, what people experience is that it's a different picture that shows up there than what you see in media outside. And the picture is more that there's a very intimate connection that in people's experience, they experience so excuse the words, but that was a word that was used there, like the birth of a new way of operating, of a new civilization, really of new ways of, organizing our economy and organizing our learning processes. In a very intentional way, they experience what's happening in their own lives, in their own relationship, as something that might seed something which is also relevant in the larger systems change. So Peter Senge often said, the most systemic is the most personal, right? Usually we tend to think, well, here's the systemic, here's the personal. No. The most systemic is the most personal in these days. So I think we see a little example there. Now, we don't know. We are midway there. I don't know where this is going to end. But what I do know is there is a space there. There's a lot of energy there. And we have no idea as educators how to organize around that. But that's our job. So there is a space between personal learning, between professional learning, and between systems transformation that we are not holding well. And that's where the space of possibility is.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, thank you very much, maybe that's a good point to pass over to Klaus Seiler from the Stark Center of Entrepreneurship, because what I've learned working with SCE in Munich is that is one of the spaces where this kind of process and transformation process has the chance to develop. And you mentioned there are many spaces right now, but it's the core of what I've heard looking at the new type of university or new type of learning is the connection between your own transformation, your personal transformation, and you're using your own energy and the idea you bring into life and the outer learning and the outer partnering. And I guess that's maybe one of the unique things which you realize when you work with startups, and that's what Klaus is usually doing as he says is a practitioner, but he's also a researcher. Klaus, your turn.
Yeah, it's so interesting to listen, but we are already running out of time. So therefore now you have to do a good entrepreneurial pitch in some minutes. But you talk from really disruptive innovation, and then we really have to transform a whole system. And to bring this into practice, I think it's not so easy. It's easier to talk about. But Otto, I really appreciate your approach of Theory U, where you described an innovation approach. How to can transformation be designed in such a way that innovators can actively shape and create the future, right? By expanding their understanding of needs through active exchange also with others, and so they also transform themselves. And my question would be really briefly, could you describe the main aspects of this Theory U and explain us why the Theory U approach not only can help for innovation projects, but also how it could help to really transform universities into such a deeper learning institution.
Okay. I mean, I can make a beginning. Maybe you can add to that. So I would say probably the shortest way of describing theory U or summarizing theory U is not by using the sentence, I think, therefore I am. But theory U can be summarized with the following sentence. I pay attention this way, therefore it emerges that way. So theory U is about how we pay attention. And I would claim that in this century, the ultimate scarce resource, everyone knows, it's not oil, right? It's not data, actually. It is attention, right? Everyone is competing about our attention. That's at the essence of the current economy. And that's also, I would claim, the most under-attended to aspect of really transformational leadership. Because what is it that we do as leaders? What is it that we do as change makers? We shape fields of attention. Energy, so the first principle is energy follows attention. Wherever you put your attention on, that's where the energy goes, right? It's true for your own energy, but it's also for, as every leader knows, it's also true for the people around you, right? So whatever you place your attention on, that's where the energy goes. So you want to prevent something bad from happening. Your attention is on that bad not to happen. Well, then, you know, everyone is operating from a reactive energy, right? So that's your impact as a leader. If you're able to respond, say, to a disruption from a deeper place that's aligned with your own deeper intention, that's where the energy goes. Kind of, you will be attracting a more generative energy. So I think we know that, right, from occasional noticing our own process, but it's not intentionally used. So I would say the essence of an awareness-based, so what I'm articulating here is a view, is I would say the state-of-the-art view of systems thinking today. And that is, it's an awareness-based view of systems change. And that basically says that in order to change a system, you have to transform consciousness. And I would claim the only way to transform consciousness is to make a system sense and see itself. We know that from coaching, we know that from interpersonal work, but are we really applying that on a systems level? Mostly not. Hence, we live in a world where in most large systems can be described with we collectively create results that nobody wants. Environmental destructions, this and that. So kind of these, so that's basically, I would say, the work we need to do. That's where I try to contribute, right? Develop awareness-based social technologies, basically pieces, practices, and tools that can allow us to hold up the mirror, right? Not only on the level of the individual, but on the level of systems. Because as you know, systems thinkers, as systems change makers, right? What is essentially our intervention? It's true for our intervention is about making systems, traditionally we would say, making systems see themselves, right? So that's like, you know, through all sorts of methods and tools. But I would say that's not enough, because that's just systems thinking. Today, we live in a world where we need to blend systems thinking with systems sensing, by which I mean embodied forms of learning that activate, that make visible the deeper resonances that we can experience. So making systems see and sense themselves is the pathway of activating the intelligence of the heart. So that's, all right, so that was not a short answer, but the short answer is I pay attention this way, therefore it emerges that way. And the longer version of that is that awareness-based systems change essentially is focusing on making systems sense and see themselves. And to do that well, we need methods and tools. And I think that's the missing capacity. So we live in a world where massive transformation needs to happen in this decade, right? So the clock is ticking, but we don't have democratized access to the transformation literacy that we need right now. And I think that's our job. Our job as educators is to democratize the access to this transformation literacy. And it has to do with this core process, making systems sense and see themselves. It's something very personal. We need to practice. There's like embodied capacities. It's stuff you can actually learn and teach. I mean, so you can be very methodical around how to build these learning environments. And yeah, I think we learned a lot how to do that. And we even learned about how to bring that to scale. But of course, all of these are just prototypes. And now is the moment to put that to work.
I think this is an interesting view also because the European Commission and the OECD together, they want, of course, to help universities to set up such a transforming university towards to a system thinking, but of course also to entrepreneurial universities. And so they set up also a framework to help universities. And they have set up 8 areas to help. And I think I would like to pick 3 areas. One would be that they recommend that leadership and governance of an HEI should be oriented in such a way that the transformation process towards an entrepreneurial university are supported. And the other 2 dimensions I would like to mention there is digital transformation. I think you mentioned this already before, and capability, and also internationalization. So, and I think this is not only that we as a person, as a professor or as a teacher have to transform, but we have to transform the whole organization. And what would you suggest from your experience? What can universities do to perhaps also working with other universities by internationalization and so on to do, and especially also how to set up a governance that help to support that process?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to respond to that, but I'm really also interested in what others have to say in that, and I guess that's probably what we are also discussing in the breakouts, I assume. So I would say this. I mean, the first, from my little window into that, I would just start with an observation that probably many have made, which is there is a lot more openness now on really the whole topic of reinventing. I see that here in North America, but also in Europe and other places, how to really reinvent and transform universities. I think the topic is there. So university presidents are interested in that. Of course, maybe some of the more innovative faculty are. It's also a need in society. So that's one observation. So the topic, the conversation is there, the openness is there. And my second observation is how little actually happens as a result of these conversations, right? I mean, you may be in a better place to judge that, but I think the core of the machine is not transformed, is not really. So what is the core of the machine? It's, of course, the tenure track, right? So how governance works, right? And now how you are evaluated. And so kind of it's this whole kind of career path, right? So the real question is really, can we really do more than nice conversations where everyone is agreeing on stuff, how important it is, and then little happens as a result. So there is, I heard at the last Academy of Management, I was on a panel with somebody from, I think was in Michigan State University. He was the dean or no, the chancellor or also. And so he told an interesting example. He said, well, in our case, so they made the same assessment and they said, well, you can't really, with young faculty, I mean, they would be predisposed to be your kind of moving, right, the university into the next. That's not going to happen, right? Because they are just adhering to all the traditional criteria. So to get their tenure, right? So, okay, let's forget about them. Tenure track faculty, right? So those who already have it, that's the intervention point. And let's just shift how they are being assessed to SDGs, period, right? So it's not peer-reviewed articles, it's SDGs. Your impact on the SDGs. I thought that was interesting, right? So, and I mean, that's kind of when we really are, if we want to have a real conversation of transforming the university sector, we need to have this conversation, because everything else is just kind of the, more maybe, I think that would be, in terms of governance, at least one important conversation to have. And it also plays into, so how are the different types of faculty, right? And maybe have something, if transformation in society, and if that impact is critical for the university of the future. And I think about, when you think about the evolution of universities, from the unity of teaching, kind of the pre-classical, then unity of research and teaching, the classical university, and then, then the massive opening to the, towards application and democratizing the access to universities. I think now we are at the cusp of yet another evolutionary step where the universities, not only of the future, but of the current moment, I think, need to be more in support of and embedded in being helpful for societal transformation, and in the way kind of we have discussed it. And I think that that has to, for example, it has to result into new infrastructures between universities and these places in society where that actually happens. And so we probably also need a new type of faculty, an additional type that is really more kind of blending some of the academic work kind of more into action research around systems transformation, right? So where you really participate and are helpful for these processes. So it's these, and I think we can experiment with those things. Probably in many universities, you have small pockets that try to move into that direction, but often they are not really connected, and they are also under-resourced and undervalued, and they are like counter-mainstream in their own context. So there is probably a lot we could do in terms of alliance building and pushing up this agenda in a way that it has more like a systems transformation impact also on the level of the university itself, because the need is there, but the old machine is still alive and kicking, right? And not in real danger. So I think there is a, but you know much more about this. I mean, I'm just basically sharing some of the conversations and experiences I had. Let me stop here.
Yeah, I think you give us the feeling that we have a lot to do, and there is space to grow and also to grow together. I think it's a pity that sometimes it's slow, but I think also perhaps with Corona and so on, we can speed up all that stuff. And I think this could be also a good start, your input now for the next.
Actually, I just pass it over to Rebecca, because she's introducing to the questions for the breakout rooms. And in order to prepare the questions, which you hear right now, we'll have a musical interlude or intermezzo, and we just to prepare ourselves, our inner self, to talk about the basic questions Rebecca is now telling us. And you find it in the chat as well. Unmute.
Don't hear you.
To say to everyone, thank you ever so much for your questions. There are lots of them and they're really interesting. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to hand over to Michael first before we go into the breakout rooms. Wolfgang, did you want to introduce Michael, or would you like me to?
If you would place the questions because everybody can think about the questions and reflect about the questions first.
As well as all of the questions within the chat, I guess so Wolfgang and Klaus have also got a couple of questions for you to think about during your breakout rooms in particular. And the first one is, what was and is the most impressive experience you are currently facing in the corona crisis, and how does this influence your actions? And the second question is, which tip would you like to share with others to take the next step towards an entrepreneurial university? Now, I understand you won't remember all of those. Zsuzsa has posted those in the comments section here, and they will be also posted into your chat so that you can see them again. But I think if you could have a think about those, and I'll hand back to Wolfgang to introduce Michael. And after that, I'll explain what will happen with the breakout rooms.
Okay, thank you very much. I just would like to hand over very fast to Michael, because we're running out of time already. And Michael, welcome to this performance. You are a person who is a musician, at the one hand professional musician, and working with companies and with institutions at the same time. Before you start your interlude, which will help us to reflect about the questions, what is the role of music? Why do you place music into companies or entrepreneurial ideas?
Thank you, Wolfgang. It strikes me that people's most immediate reaction to music is it's this sort of decorative art form. And it goes in one ear and it leaves this very pleasant sensation inside our heads and disappears out of the other ear. We're left with a pleasant sensation, and that's nice. But actually, when you look at the disciplines around music making and the musical practices, it becomes quite interesting about how we function as teams. Because in fact, as ensembles, we're really a matrix of knowledge managers, if you like, and it's almost the epitome of co-creation when we come together. And we're self-organizing, despite the fact you might think there's a conductor or some sort of director. In fact, the amount of self-organization that's going on within the ensemble is quite considerable and almost independent from the director. And in order to do that, we have to pay attention. And it's where we pay attention to, and our focus of attention is always shifting. And it's the only way we can function to modify this attention focus. And there are three things that really came to mind when you asked me to think about this connection with entrepreneurial thinking. And one was flexibility, because in an ensemble, you are constantly having to be flexible. But it's not just about flexibility when you're performing. Last year, I was working in Tunisia for the Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie on a project. And it struck me there that the musical flexibility that one needed to be able to work in these different environments was really quite interesting and complex. I work a lot of my time in Japan. We feel that we don't realize really how differently I feel that in Japan people listen to music and what they expect. So the first thing was flexibility. The second one was immediacy. Whatever we do when we perform, we do it in the public domain. We're immediately being watched and being scrutinized. The third thing is resilience. And resilience is tied up with responsibility, because we have to take responsibility for our actions. And we have to deal with the feedback and the assessment. And there is no place to hide. So we need to be resilient to deal with that, because we deal with this very intangible medium, where basically we have to engage with audiences by the manipulation of molecules of air, which is pretty intangible. And it's an arena in constant state of flux, and particularly in live performance. So I feel that all those things as a bundle bring a lot to entrepreneurial thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And now you're going to give us an example of a musical interlude which we can use as a reflection space for our next step to the breakout rooms, right?
I will. Now, I have to go into my new music room here in lockdown, okay? So I've got to transfer to my iPhone. I've just got to reset that as I'm going in, okay? I'll take you in.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And I'm sure everybody else is applauding you on their mute as well. It was great to have a time for reflection for your music and for sharing some of your experiences as well of engaging during music, not only during COVID-19, but to see how that works with communities in general. So since studies show that music promotes more divergent thinking, which is a key element in creativity, I think this is the perfect moment for the participants to come together for discussion. So for this part of the webinar, we're going to place you into your breakout groups of around 4 to 5 people. Depending on the number online right now, it keeps changing. So this is a chance for you to start conversations, to make new contacts, perhaps also see some old friends. So don't forget to ask for your names and contact details. And we had the couple of questions which we'd posted in the comments section, but just to remind you, one was around the experiences you're currently facing with the corona crisis and how this influences your actions, and also what tips you want to share with others. And I think we have lots of food for thought, not only in the other questions in the chat, but also from what we've already heard from Otto, from Klaus, and also from Wolfgang. We'll also be looking for some volunteers to provide some short feedback afterwards in the main plenary. So please feel free to put your hand up when we come back. So Zhuzha, will you now allocate people to their rooms? And a pop-up will appear asking you to accept to join the breakout group. And we're going to have around 15 minutes to talk together and discuss these questions. I would hand over to Otto now for summing up at the end. Also, I don't know if you can see some of the questions that are in the comment section, but I think there's enough material there for you to go on, both from the comments that we've had from people and from what's in the chat.
Well, I did not, I was just listening to the conversation. I did not now pay attention to the chat, but feel free to bring that in. So we also had a great breakout session, and I just, you know, maybe also building on Marika, what you were talking about from your experience, maybe 3 points that come up in closing for me is one, the use of theory U, also how I use it. I mean, yes, I developed the framework, but I'm also a user. I'm an innovator of building new learning environments myself. And the challenge we all have is kind of there's all these methods and tools out there. How do you bring all this damn stuff together, right? So it's the integration challenge, right? So that we have on the user end, whether you're an educator or leader or like learning architect or something. And I would say that's where I often use theory U as a meta framework, right? That's how it's useful because it allows you to hang in different pieces, right? AI, appreciative inquiry, and all these other things. And you build like a learning journey kind of for your participants in a way that is holistic, right? In terms of whole person, head, heart, and hand, but also whole system. Then secondly, a practical, so we talked about our breakout group also about what we learned in really taking transformational learning at scale. And I was, you know, I think when I think about where have I seen really interesting transformations of an existing system. So one that I came across recently is actually Stockholm School of Economics. It's an interesting challenge, story where they basically created a whole line of, so they say, okay, so it's like, let's take the old curriculum, that's 100, right? We boil it down, I think, to 66. I think they said 2/3, right? What used to be 100 is now 2/3 in terms of credit points and blah, 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 time and so on. We free up 1/3 of the entire time. We create an entire new track around that called Global Challenges. And so and the first part of that is really immersion into all the SDG challenges, right? So all the co-sensing stuff, right? And then second part, then in the next the next year or so, they move inwards, right? The bottom of the U stuff, right? They learn to meditate. They learn deep sense-making techniques, right? Every undergraduate at Stockholm School of Economics is learning to meditate. I mean, just think about that, right? So It's already there. And then, so there's like the deep sense making methods. And then the third part, as you come up on the right-hand side of the U, they do, they basically do action learning in real context, in your community, around SDG impact, right? That's where they engage with companies. That's where they really activate. The students are activating the community of entrepreneurs and so on. So it's very practical. It was sparked, what I learned, very much to my own surprise, by a ULab team from 2015. I think I mentioned ULab before. And they, dreamed something like that. They teamed up with other people, and they, they implemented that already. I think that's it's one of the examples where you can see, yes, it actually, you can change old structures and you can bring in very new learning environments into that. And then the last thing I want to say is what I like about this story, it's not only SDGs and impact this and impact that, but it's also kind of the inner dimension, the inner deeper dimension of that, which is very much highlighted also by the current Corona situation. And in a way, the essence of the whole U process is something very simple. And it's also something I try to remember as educator every moment, which is when disruption happens to you, we can respond by turning towards and leaning into an emerging future that we don't know, or we can respond by turning away and closing down the mind, the heart, the will, right? AKA ignorance, hate, and fear. And when we are turning towards, it's really cultivating curiosity, compassion, courage. So that's, at the end of the day, I think our role as educators, to cultivate these capacities within ourselves so we can embody them in the classroom, in our environments, so that we help the people we work with to also develop these capacities within themselves. Because what we see in terms of the Trumpism all around the world is not that people want to do bad things. We see it's a freeze reaction, right? It's a freeze reaction to the current disruption in situations where these deeper capacities, open mind, open heart, open will, or curiosity, compassion, courage, has not been fully developed yet. And that's basically our job. And that's why this conversation we're having here matters so much.
Yeah, that's a very powerful message for us to end on. And it leaves me to thank everyone who has joined us for today's seminar. And I hope you've enjoyed the experience. I want to give a huge thank you to Otto and to Klaus and to Wolfgang for making us reflect on these issues of transformation, of innovation, and of the future. And also to Michael for transforming the experience, allowing us to think and connect differently, not only to the challenges of higher education, but also to the webinar itself. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with HE Innovate, you can contact us through the website, or you can reach us on Twitter and LinkedIn. In addition, we're going to take away the key points and the questions that you have from the discussion, and we'll make available a short article on the website. Our next webinar is going to be on the 21st of May at 5 p.m. CET, and our topic is on online teaching methods and MOOCs, and more information will be made available on HE Innovate early next week. So on behalf of the HE Innovate team, I'd like to thank you once again for your time. We look forward to seeing you again, and have a wonderful rest of the day. And I know for some of you, it's going to be a long weekend. So goodbye all.